Okay? And in a lot of instances,
it has nothing to do with their skin color. They can be blonde hair, blue eyes Scandinavians. I still call them invaders.
Oh, sure, chatter. I'm sure you would. And it doesn't even fucking matter. You'd still be a xenophobic piece of shit if the dynamic was so different that, like, we were actually dominating Scandinavian nations the same way that we've dominated the global south, and they were coming in here in droves. You would have the same fucking attitude towards them. You'd still be a xenophobic asshole. Okay?
Isn't that just darling? Let's hear from this psychopathic pervert. Song Pecker. Who, by the way, is a super libertarian right-winger. He just knows how.
We have new information this morning.
Oh, they're still Amber Heard fans? Yes. They're very loud. Like 100%. And they spend most of their time yelling at me rather than like Johnny Depp supporters. Which is funny because I am not a Johnny Depp supporter. He's a hedge fund guy. He is a pharma bro. He's a fucking Silicon Valley tech guy.
I think
Him,
it's like,
JD
Vance,
Elon Musk even. Elon Musk is at least like visibly autistic as fuck. So people assume that he's like some kind of fucking engineering savant when he's not. He has one fucking patent. It still ultimately comes
What
from
the fuck
a place
has he
of
done?
powerlessness in general. Tackling misogyny in society
He has one
is virtually
patent. All he does is
impossible.
hire
It's
the
patriarchal.
appropriate
It's
people and
deeply
then
embedded.
fucking, put them under horrific circumstances.
So you're not gonna get any play yelling at fucking like Asmongold or some shit. So you're gonna yell at who? You're gonna yell at someone who tries to the best of his ability, develop a relatively safe environment and change that environment. So then it makes you feel like you've actually improved something. And in a lot of instances, it also comes from like a misunderstanding.
About President-elect Donald Trump's plans on immigration. The incoming border czar, Tom Homan, says the administration intends to revive practices labeled cruel by critics, including separating families. Scott McFarland is covering the Trump transition and joins us now. Scott, good morning.
Dana, good morning. Homan told the Washington Post immigration authorities will once again put families with children in detention centers when Donald Trump returns to office. That's a policy that was halted by the Biden administration in 2021, and that they begin building new holding facilities for immigrant families to kickstart that controversial process. Homan also says the feds will try to track down nearly 300,000 immigrant children who he characterizes as missing, and that they'd hire private contractors to help locate the children. Immigration experts tell CBS News those numbers misrepresent government data, but Homan acknowledges in the interview.
Yeah, that just means that means that they are with 300,000 children that have been processed through the American immigration facilities that have been given to an immediate family member, for the record. When they're talking about 300,000 missing children, those children are not missing. They are with immediate family members that went through a background check process. No, people say or trafficking. No, the broad majority of these kids are not trafficked. You're out of your mind. It's like when people, what was it? When people used to say that like during the peak of the QAnon like COVID era, people would say that like what is there like 800,000 kidnappings a year or something, like 800,000 children are kidnapped in the United States of America, and it was a misunderstanding of the data in and of itself. Where one, they greatly overemphasized the number; it wasn't correct, and I think that the actual number of like children that are kidnapped with like a white van or some shit from a complete random stranger was like in the low tens. Now, of course, that is still horrifying, but it's not 600 or 800,000 children being kidnapped most of the kidnappings that they think are kidnappings are actually family court matters, an immediate family member with a custody battle, a child that goes missing for a day and then is found. That's literally what it is. Most of them are found within the 24-hour time frame, but people just like look at that number without people just simply look at that number without any further examination. Yeah. Donald Trump's incoming border czar Tom Homan has said that the U.S. government can't find more than 300,000 migrant children and that many have been lured into forced labor and sex trafficking. President-elect Donald Trump and his political allies, including Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, have repeatedly made similar claims. Trump's team's claims are that there are 300,000 children that have been, forced into sex trafficking and slavery. Very QAnon adjacent. Okay. According to immigration experts and attorneys, the claim largely stems from an August report from the DHS's Inspector General's office, which found that 32,000 unaccompanied minors failed to show up for court dates at immigration courts from 2019 to 2023. The report noted that 291,000 migrant children received no court notices at all. It also called on the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to take immediate action to ensure the safety of unaccompanied migrant children in the U.S. Migrant children who do not appear for court are considered higher risk for trafficking, exploitation, or forced labor, the Inspector General's office reported. But Aaron Reichlin Melnick, policy director at the American Immigration Council, a migrant advocacy group, told the BBC the figures are indicative of bureaucratic paperwork issue rather than anything nefarious. When you hear the phrase missing, you think that there's a child that someone is trying to find and can't. That's not the case here. The government has not made any effort to find these children. Many of the children, experts say, may well be at the addresses that are on file with the government, but we're simply unable to make their court dates. That doesn't mean something bad happened to them. It means you missed a court hearing. There are valid concerns about exploitation, of course, but the overwhelming majority of these kids are delivered to an immediate family member with a proper background check that is simply not going to a court, is simply not attending court. We cannot, however, suggest that all 320,000 of those children are being labor trafficked. Eric Rourke, an immigration researcher with Numbers USA, which calls for tighter border control, said that the children are difficult to track because some combination of apathy, incompetence, and bureaucratic inefficiency. Many, hopefully even most, are safe with caring sponsors, he added, but the Biden administration can't actually say that one way or another and apparently doesn't care enough to find out. Unaccompanied minors detained at the U.S.-Mexico border go through a complicated process that begins with detention and processing by Customs and Border Patrol. Okay? If the child is from a foreign country that is not Mexico or Canada, they're placed into removal proceedings and transferred to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. HHS, through its Office of Refugee Resettlement Office, cares for the children in a network of state licensed providers. The office also seeks to reunify children with family members in the U.S. or with individual and organizational sponsors, who in turn are obligated to ensure they arrive at immigration court dates. Okay? What can the Trump administration do? I don't even want to know what they can do. I mean, they basically want to. They basically want to do everything they can. They basically want to do everything in their power to deport these kids. Okay. And perhaps even better, deport the immediate family members that they were released to. Several immigration attorneys contacted by the BBC suggested the administration is likely becoming a sponsor for undocumented children much more difficult, even if the sponsor is a member of their family. In practice, this would mean that more undocumented children are kept in detention. They could do what the Obama admin did, detain them. The controversial Remain in Mexico program could also be applied to children, forcing them to wait across the border for the outcome of their immigration proceedings. I'm not sure even they know what they're going to do with the kids. But there's a border problem they're trying to figure out first, and that's the first concern before they're going to be harsh on both the children and adults. I think that they're going to be harsh on both children and adults. That much is clear. They've said that that's precisely what they're going to do. But yeah, the 300,000 number is the number of children that have come over the border with no immediate family members that have been detained by Customs and Border Patrol between the years 2019 to 2023 and have been released to a sponsor, either a state-appointed program that takes care of undocumented migrant children, or an immediate family member. In many of these instances, it's an immediate family member living in the United States of America. If you recall, one of the most cruel things that the Trump administration did, one of the craziest things that they did, was they would literally use the children that were apprehended at the border as bait. Okay? They would literally use the children apprehended at the border as bait. They would put them in the detention facilities, and then they would contact immediate family members, and then they would try to, and in some instances, successfully apprehend the immediate family members if they were not documented. They used the immediate family members of the detained children that were detained at the border to deport other people that were also currently inside of the United States of America. It's insane. Anyway. So yeah. Fantastic stuff overall. We are going to become increasingly more demonic.
Some children of undocumented immigrants were born here and are therefore U.S. citizens. Those children cannot be deported, but their parents who are undocumented can be. Homan says it would be the parents' choice whether to let their families be split up.
Like, think about that. You're an undocumented migrant living in the United States of America. You have immediate family members that were born on U.S. soil and therefore are American citizens. All they've known is America. They're American citizens. They go to American school. In many instances, they only speak English. And this process, okay, is like the reverse chain migration. This process is like chain detention, where what Homan wants to do, what the Trump administration wants to do, is go to these children and say, hey, you either have to live here without your parents or you have to leave the country with your parents, despite being an American citizen, not having any citizenship in any other country, despite the fact that you have no understanding of the culture or the language of the country that we're going to deport you to. You have no connection to that country. It is unimaginably traumatic. It is just purely evil shit.
The controversy surrounding family separations just exploded during Trump's first term. His allies have argued it's a deterrent.
It's also vast. The cruelty is so vast. You have to understand how vast it is. 1 in 15 families in this country, 1 in 15 households in this country is of mixed status. Okay? That means in one house out of every 15 house in the United States of America, there's at least one parent that is undocumented. 1 in 15. Think about that. That is tens of millions of people. In order to do this kind of mass deportation, you have to be knocking down everyone's doors, going into every fucking neighborhood, and forcibly ripping people that work in every sector in this country and putting them in detention facilities and maybe even deporting their children as well.
To illegal immigration, Dana.
Yeah, people are enraged hearing that may be back. What about some other controversial immigration policies from Trump's first term? Any others that we might possibly see?
Yes, in this interview, Holman says Trump wants to reinstitute a Remain in Mexico program, which requires people who seek asylum to escape danger to wait outside of U.S. territory while their asylum claims are considered in U.S. courts, and that can take some time. Holman said they're considering a plan for so-called worksite enforcement also, which critics call worksite raids, in which agents descend on a business to track down the employees there who'd face deportation. All of this is going to cost money, which Trump will need to get approved through a very narrowly and bitterly divided Congress.
By the way, the numbers are even higher on this, but this is a paper from 1999 where it says nearly 1 in 10 U.S. families with their children is a mixed status family. But that's from 1999. I think the updated number is 1 in 15.
Congress, which Michelle takes office 1 week from today.
An expensive proposition, Scott. Thank you.
$315 billion. That's one staggering cost estimate for Donald Trump's signature campaign promise.
The largest domestic deportation operation in American history.
More conservative estimates are still enormous. One group puts it at $162 billion. That's more than the government spent on most federal agencies in fiscal year 2024. We'll explain why an operation of this scale could require hundreds of billions of dollars over the course of a decade.
Is it your plan to deport everyone who is here illegally over the next 4 years?
Well, I think you have to do it, and it's a very tough thing to do.
That means roughly 13 million immigrants who entered the country illegally are at risk of deportation, about 4% of the U.S. population. To put that into perspective, the entire U.S. prison and jail population in 2022 was around 1.9 million people.
Scale is difficult for the government to carry out.
Aaron Reichlin-Melnick is a senior fellow at the American Immigration Council, a liberal immigration group.
Trump would have to do more than quadruple current ICE removals of people arrested in the interior just to hit the levels that we've seen previously under Obama.
I think that you take a sequential approach to it. You start with what's achievable. Let's start with 1 million.
The details of the plan are still being worked out, but let's say Trump does decide to deport 1 million people a year. That could still cost about $88 billion annually and take 11 years, according to one estimate. And that's assuming 20% of people would leave on their own.
Yes, it's expensive, but the trade-offs, I think, are well worth it.
Ron Vitello led the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency known as ICE for a year in Trump's first term.
Right now, the government is underfunded for its ability to detain people. To be able to accomplish this and the border mission simultaneously will require a reallocation, if not an infusion for resources.
Other immigration experts say,
yeah, it's unimaginably costly as well. I mean, I usually don't talk about how costly this is, both to the economy and also just like how costly it is to even fulfill this initiative, because I think it's insanely cruel, first and foremost. But it's crazy to me that like we always have money. We always have money for this type of shit. We just simply never have money to house homeless people. We never have money to make education
K through
free. You can't have we can't fix the potholes. We can't improve infrastructure. We can't give you better ISP service. We will never let you have public transit. Why? Because all the money has to go to our incredibly cruel, militant border policy.
The actual cost of Trump's mass deportation plan will be much lower than the American Immigration Council's estimate of $315 billion.
A more robust enforcement like the administration is contemplating may create significant economies of scale.
Stephen Camarata is the director of research at the Center for Immigration Studies, a group favoring immigration restrictions that helped staff Trump's first term.
Once you start doing it and you get an infrastructure in place, then it might be a lot cheaper.
Deportation starts with arrest.
There'll be targeted arrest. We'll know who we're going to arrest, where we're most likely to find them based on numerous investigative processes.
We're starting with the criminals, and we got to do it. And then we're starting with others.
Trump says dreamers, or people who entered the U.S. illegally as children, might be an exception. To make arrests, ICE officers would either identify someone who's already in a jail or prison, or go to a person's home.
Police, come to the door. The majority of undocumented immigrants are not in law enforcement custody. Most of them have never committed any offenses.
Arresting people out in the community, known as at-large arrests, isn't a common tactic for ICE.
Trump greatly improved those numbers, for the record. That was one major difference between Donald Trump's immigration policy versus even Barack Obama's immigration policy. Barack Obama was the king of detentions or the king of deportations because he was doing border apprehensions. Okay. Donald Trump continued the border apprehensions, but more importantly than that, he went in and did dragnet. He utilized ICE like a Gestapo force where he would just do at-large arrests, greatly releasing the shackles, the legal hurdles that that kept ICE somewhat restrained. It's going to be worse this time around.
Pablo says it's more logistically complicated and more expensive, but it's at the center of the Trump administration's plan.
I'm not concerned that they won't be able to find them. It's just a matter of time, given the circumstances, given the availability of information, and given the resources in play.
At-large arrests often require multiple federal agents and take several days because ICE officers don't generally have warrants.
Immigration violations are not criminal, which means that a judicial warrant to arrest them would not have probable cause. They might have to wait hours for the person to leave their house. They might have to stake out a work site.
To carry out arrests at this scale, the American Immigration Council estimates ICE would need to hire over 30,000 new law enforcement agents and staff, making it the largest law enforcement agency in the federal government. Vitello says this number is overstated, and that state and local law enforcement could be directed via task forces to help with at-large arrests, something they...
What are you saying? If 4% of your country... What? Literally the only argument for mass migration is GDP growth. Y'all have been brainwashed by the elite into thinking that unlimited population growth is necessary. It's still cheaper than one payment to Israel amount. If 4% of your country are invaders, you have a fucking issue. You think that undocumented immigrants are invaders? Dude, I really despise right-wing fucking morons so much. Like, listen, you big dumb baby. You wouldn't have a single goddamn vegetable if it wasn't for the supposed migrant invasion, okay? Shut the fuck up. If it wasn't so unimaginably cruel and violent, I would be sitting here excited at the prospect for you to recognize what kind of economic collapse that you would experience when the price of a fucking tomato is $75. Speaking about invaders. I know that the chatter probably doesn't eat his vegetables. Okay, he eats chicken nuggets. Okay, what do you think is working at the poultry facilities? I feel like the left needs to refrain from using the word Nazi so flippantly. It lessens the meaning and impact of the word. So do you support the migrant slavery in Dubai? Do you think that it's the same process? Do you think that I'm not an advocate for processing all of the undocumented migrants? Don't try to fucking pull that shit on me. No, I understand the difference between an undocumented migrant and any other member of the working class that has the proper paperwork is that they are devoid of the proper paperwork. This is an unnecessary legal hurdle placed upon them so they can be continuously exploited. That exploitation also has a downward impact on overall wages for the rest of the working class. The solution to that is not to literally engage in Hitlerian-style concentration camps, detention facilities, dragnets, having hundreds of fucking undocumented laborers in court at the same time in order to expediently process them through the criminal justice system and place them in concentration camps with shitty fucking conditions as you try to actively deport them until you recognize that that is too costly of an endeavor and it's much easier to just like kill them if you don't fucking enslave them in these detention facilities. That is Hitlerian. That is exactly what Adolf Hitler did do, as a matter of fact. That is what he did. I am not in favor of involuntary servitude, slavery of any sort. If your economy relies on migrant slave labor, I think there might be some serious issues. Yeah, no shit. Welcome to 90% of my commentary. What the fuck? Yeah, the problem is you think that the 4% are invaders. You think, look at this. Are you telling me that 4% of the population are illegals? If 4% of your country are invaders, you have a fucking issue. You have an issue. You think these guys are invaders. There is no difference in the way they see the world and what they want out of the world than you. Yes, I do think that this endless profit seeking and endless cruelty and endless exploitation that the American economy relies on is unsustainable and also horrifyingly unjust. This is how it works. We destroy these countries. We also supercharge ecological disaster through man-made climate change, making agricultural work impossible in these countries. So then, of course, people go, all right, well, I have no other options. I need to survive. I'm going to go to America. They trek thousands of miles, oftentimes on foot, through treacherous conditions to come here so they can work for pennies on the dollar. This process is incredibly beneficial for capital owners, for the bosses. It's so funny hearing you talk about this stuff, but never mention factory farming. What? Maybe Americans being subjected to having to work in the disgusting conditions in our concentration camps we use for chicken nuggies will be a good thing. At any point in history, if hundreds of thousands of people entered your country without permission, that would have been considered an invasion. No. Brother. First and foremost, the idea that these guys are not entering the country with permission is silly. Okay? The permission structure quite literally is paperwork. Someone signing off on it. That's it. In order for this to be considered an invasion, you would have to think that every Guatemalan, Venezuelan, Mexican, every Honduran, every El Salvadoran is actually a monolithic force that is in the United States of America, not due to self-interest and the same exact fucking things that you need, okay? A roof over your head, food on your table, a better future for your children. But instead, they're here for some fuck shit. They're here to ruin the country. What an insane fucking attitude to have. Over 20 million people, by your estimations, that come from virtually every part of this world, every part of this globe. Yeah, they're all one note. They're all one-minded. They're all here to do invasion. They're all to do fucking fifth column style infiltration of the United States of America. What a fucking incredible invasion. White supremacists are so funny. They think white genocide is happening because people are voluntarily engaging in miscegenation. That's white genocide. Not the genocide that actual forces subject others to, other nations to, other ethnicities to. Okay? It's only genocide when people are voluntarily having sex with like a Latino guy instead of you. Then it's white genocide. It's an invasion, not when you have boots on the ground military warfare, but it's an invasion when people that were invaded or have had their fucking lives ruined due to American empire, due to Western imperialism, due to the global banking structure and debt traps that we have implemented in all of these fucking countries, due to the ecological disasters that they're facing and the lack of opportunity that they have, due to the fucking political instability that they face that we cause in their countries, then they escape those treacherous conditions to come and work here for pennies on the dollar, and that's an invasion. Oh, so now I'm a fucking white supremacist. Yes, you are. You are. If you consider undocumented immigrants to be invading this country, I'm sorry, you are a fucking white supremacist. Whether you recognize that or not doesn't change that reality. Okay? Yeah, you are an evil psychopath. If
Well, you are morally on the right side of this argument if you are anti-racist, and it seems like you are. You're still serving the same purpose.
At most, you are deluded and stupid. Okay,
diluting the conversation,
in
trying to fucking laser in on one
charitable interpretation. You are a stupid person who has been deluded into believing that these people, okay, that come from all different walks of life, all different political ideologies, that are coming into the United States of America for one purpose, which is to have a better life for themselves, are actually invading as a monolithic parasitic force. Okay? If you say that, then yeah, you're either a fucking dumbass who is repeating Fox News because that's what your grandpappy saw, that's what your pappy saw, and you're just basically repeating the same fucking racist, stupid sentiment, or you're just straight up a card-carrying fucking neo-Nazi. It's one or the other. Are you smart enough to be well-read enough into the fucking nerdy, esoteric neo-Nazi bullshit and therefore a neo-Nazi? Or are you a dumbass who is just repeating whatever the fuck you heard from other people and are fearful and reacting in a fearful way? Okay? I've never watched Fox News in my life and don't consume. I don't care what your fucking personal background is. Your output is the same. This should cause you to really reconsider why you examine the situation with the lens that you're examining it. Instead of fucking reacting to me, try to reinterpret the subject matter. Try to look back and think, why do I think that, once again, 20 million people from all different walks of life, all different political ideologies that are coming from all around the fucking global South, why do I think that they are a monolithic force invading the country? You will find your answer there. Okay? That's it. I don't give a fuck if you've never watched Fox News. Why are you repeating Jared Taylor sentiments? That's what you should be asking yourself.
That environment.
If you've never watched Fox News, what the fuck do you sound like Tucker Carlson?
Something.
Okay?
And in a lot of
it has nothing to do with their skin color. They could be blonde hair, blue eyed Scandinavians. I still call them invaders. Oh, sure, chatter. I'm sure you would. And it doesn't even fucking matter. You'd still be a xenophobic piece of shit if the dynamic was so different that, like, we were actually dominating Scandinavian nations the same way that we've dominated the global South, and they were coming in here in droves. You would have the same fucking attitude towards them. You'd still be a xenophobic asshole. Okay? It doesn't matter. You used to be a fascist in that regard. It doesn't have to be just like the fact that they're brown, okay? Once again, really reconsider why you sound exactly like fucking Tucker Carlson.
Already do.
Having that referral system, having state and locals help ICE officers do their job. Better to have it than not, but not definitive in whether they do the work or not.
Then there's detention, the most expensive part of the whole process. It costs around $200 a day to hold someone in ICE custody. Congress has provided enough funding for at least 41,500 detention beds in fiscal year 2025. But that's not nearly enough to detain 1 million people a year. According to the American Immigration Council, ICE would need to construct 216 soft-sided facilities every year for 11 years. Soft-sided facilities are temporary tent-like structures that have typically been used near the border. Anyone not physically detained would be placed on electronic surveillance, which costs approximately $4 per person per day. Private contractors involved in every stage of the detention process could drive up prices even more.
Contractors drive people in between ICE detention centers or drive the vans after somebody's arrested.
Detaining children would also make this process more expensive.
I don't want to be breaking up families, so the only way you don't break up the family is you keep them together and you have to send them all back.
Family detention is the most expensive kind of detention because the U.S. government is required to give people...
I don't really care about the economy that much. I just don't want to live in a country that looks like India. Yeah, I mean, this is like the peak racism take, okay? This is just like... This is a peak racist take. I mean, he's a fucking neo-Nazi.
Minimum standards, and those children need to have child welfare professionals on site. They need to have pediatricians on site. There needs to be a provision for them to get schooling if they are going to be held for months or potentially years at a time.
Vitello says one way the government could reduce costs is by repurposing existing detention centers like Guantanamo Bay.
A third country like a Panama, potentially Mexico, could agree to hold third country nationals so that their due process could be adjudicated, thereby lowering the cost.
Bro, that's not racism. He just doesn't want our country to be invaded. Exactly, right? Right, chatter? That other chatter who was saying, like, what do you mean? It doesn't matter.
And kind of sending a message down the pipeline that people are not going to be released into the United States to await those adjudications. That alone will reduce the number of individuals trying to cross the border illegally.
Camerata says there are over 1 million immigrants who could be detained at a much lower cost.
There are people with a final order of removal that we just never made leave. Those individuals shouldn't have to be held long. We can get them out very quickly.
After detention comes legal processing, which immigration law experts say is the biggest bottleneck in the mass deportation process. An additional 10.6 million cases would require nearly 2,000 more immigration judges and over 1,100 more courtrooms.
I'm a mover, and one thing I can't stop thinking about is what happens to everyone who gets deported homes and possesses all the rights. What do you mean? It's exactly the same as Nazi Germany. It's up for grabs. It's free real estate. It's free cheap goods that you can just like buy from a secondary market in the exact same way that Zone of Interest addressed this. Yeah, you just do estate sales. It's something that already happens in the West Bank quite frequently, as a matter of fact. It's something that Israel does on a regular basis in both Gaza and also in the West Bank, and they did a little bit in Lebanon as well.
There is not only a cost in the immigration court side, but there's also a cost in the ICE side in getting these new prosecutors online. You need support staff for the judges, judicial law clerks, secretaries.
Staffing on both sides leads each case to cost over $2,500. To set up new courtrooms quickly, the government would likely construct tent courts, like those built in 2019 to implement the migrant protection protocols. This was when immigrants living in the U.S. illegally were returned to Mexico to wait for the duration of their court proceedings. They went to tent courts near the border to virtually appear in front of judges.
You could do those hearings much faster, logistically get more judges and more hearings heard in a day.
Yeah, we can't have judges that process claims for asylum seekers, but we can have judges to expediently deport. This is why I'm saying it's going to be El Salvadoran court style, you know, judge with a balaclava sitting in a fucking crowded court proceeding and doing dragnet allocations, just like, 200 at a time, boom, boom, boom. Fuck it, put an AI there, actually. Yeah, we'll have AI judges.
As with finding new efficiencies in the detention space, that is another thing that has its limits.
Tent-style courtrooms in Laredo, Texas cost...
It's so funny to me when like people get mad at Israel on the Republican side, because there's plenty of people who like think what Israel's doing is like fucked up and also very costly. But then they like love this shit. So I guess it's just you don't want Jews doing it? I don't understand. Like, what is it? Like, I'm universally against this sort of fascist idea, okay? I don't care who's doing it. I don't care if it's America doing it. I don't care if it's Israel doing it. I'm against it, okay? You can't be on the one hand, that one chatter, remember, that one chatter who's not a Nazi, was very upset at how much money we're giving to Israel because Israel does this sort of shit, but then totally fine when we're doing it in the United States of America, calling them invaders. Well, what the fuck do you think Israel considers Palestinians? They call them invaders too.
Cost about $16 million to build and $143 million annually to operate. Once a person receives a final removal order, they have to either report for deportation at a later date or wait in detention until then.
At that point, the US government has to actually arrange the removal. That would involve putting them on a bus and sending them to Mexico, but if they're from any other country other than Canada, that means putting them on a plane and flying them to their ultimate destination.
An operation of this scale could
I'll admit I've been getting brainwashed by right-wing groups, which is why I'm here to open my mind. But I would agree with deporting illegally entered criminals. Now, I do not agree with importing paperless people that do not commit crimes that cost that country. I also hate the idea of breaking up families, and it's disgusting. Please do call me a dumbass if my vision is flawed, but do tell why I'm flawed so I can become better. Yeah, the overwhelming majority of undocumented migrants are actually not doing any crimes other than crossing the border. That's it. Like, damn near the entirety. Undocumented immigrants are actually responsible for significantly less crime per capita than natural-born U.S. citizens are. Donald Trump has to lie about this over and over again. That's where racism comes in, where Donald Trump will say, undocumented migrants kill hundreds of thousands of Americans every year. Now, if I'm going to interpret what he's saying there in the most charitable fashion, okay, I will assume that he means fentanyl deaths, okay? Because if he doesn't mean fentanyl deaths, then he's out of his fucking mind. The real number of homicide and manslaughter committed by undocumented migrants on U.S. soil in the fiscal year of 2024 is like, what, 29? It's not 100,000. 29. It's not 29,000. It's just 29, okay? So maybe he means fentanyl, right? Maybe he means like, oh, these guys are trafficking fentanyl. And that's leading to, thousands of fentanyl deaths in the nation. Well, therein lies another problem. The overwhelming majority, if not the damn near entirety of fentanyl that are trafficked over the American border from our southern border and regular ports of entry, actually 90% of them are apprehended at regular ports of entry, okay? They're coming in through the ports. Chemical compounds necessary to develop fentanyl are coming in through the fucking ports, oftentimes through China. The other direct introduction of fentanyl into the American marketplace is coming through regular ports of entry in cars that are not driven by undocumented migrants, not trafficked in through the knapsack of an otherwise law-abiding abuela coming in from Guatemala. It's actually coming with Americans who are driving their own cars and getting them chopped up in Mexico to deliver it into the United States of America. 90% of the fentanyl trafficked over the U.S. border is coming in through regular ports of entry. 90% of those who are arrested for trafficking fentanyl into the country are actually American citizens. Okay? This is why the notion, if the underlying notion of why we have to do these mass deportations as like endlessly costly, endlessly cruel, is because undocumented migrants are doing a shit ton of crimes, well then face the reality that they are not actually doing a shit ton of crimes. They're not doing any crimes at all, as a matter of fact. They're less likely to do crime than documented U.S. citizens are likely to do crime. Part of it is because they are fearful of law enforcement scrutiny. This makes a lot of sense. To be clear, I'm not American, so all my information has come through different sources that I've realized are flawed. Exactly why I'm here. Yeah, the information that I gave you is from both the Department of Homeland Security and Customs and Border Patrol, for the record, just so you understand. 81.9% were U.S. citizens for drugs in general, not just fent. Sorry, it's even higher for fent, but it's 81.9% of those who are apprehended for trafficking drugs in the U.S. are actually American citizens.
Require over 6,000 removal flights per year.
Can you explain to me why the same capitals who benefit from immigrant labor tend to be the same people who want to deport them and spread this fear? For a couple different reasons. One, because they don't think that their workers will get deported, which is a foolish assumption. But more importantly, the fact that you create this panic around undocumented migrants is exactly why you can keep them undocumented. That's it. And if you keep them undocumented, those capital owners benefit from hyper exploiting them. As long as they do not have the proper paperwork and legal recourse and can't vote, they are a permanent underclass that you can dominate. It is the very fact that It is the very fact that undocumented labor force is kept undocumented that drives their wages and your wages down as a consequence.
For comparison, ICE had around 1,200 removal flights in fiscal year 2023. The average ICE removal flight costs about $17,000.
If you recognize their humanity, you would probably be more in favor of advocating to process them and document them. As long as you are fearful of them, fearful of the other, fearful that they are somehow, quote unquote, invading the country, you can keep them undocumented and, open to exploitation.
$1 per hour. This number could go up if private contractors who provide ICE with planes and pilots raise their prices.
But there are other assets, right? ICE has a number of its own aircraft that are already in service today. The Justice Department, the Marshal Service, has their own transportation aircraft. The scale-up need could come from the military.
Trump told NBC News in November that there is no price tag for his plan. Camerata says the cost will likely be spread out over several years because it would be impractical to deport even 1 million people a year, let alone all 13 million in a single one-time operation.
In this case, it's probably hyperbole. What I think he's trying to do is tell everyone, when I take over, the immigration law is going to be back in business. And I think it's going to have a big effect, and then it's going to be up to the public to judge whether he kept his word.
But getting enough funding from Congress will be crucial for an operation of this magnitude. Senate Republicans have said that passing a border funding bill will be the top priority next year.
Border security, more bed spaces so you don't have to release people that shouldn't be released, and more ICE agents to deport people who represent a threat to our country and shouldn't be here to begin with.
Republicans control both chambers of Congress next term, but it's a narrow majority, making spending on this scale no guarantee.
To my Democratic friends, I think if you resist rational deportation policy, you do so at your own peril.
Turning to politics this morning, and President-elect Trump making new threats to expand U.S. territory, referencing Canada, Greenland, and the Panama Canal, prompting swift reaction from some of our allies. White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks joins us now with more. Mary Alice, good morning.
Well, good morning. Yeah, the president-elect's recent comments drawing swift pushback from the president of Panama, the prime minister of Greenland, and others.
Just remember, right after the H-1B visa conversation that we were having, remember the old adage that, one, white supremacy harms white people as well, okay? Just like transphobia harms cis women as well, okay? Something to consider is that this process of mass deportation is incredibly costly, an incredibly costly endeavor, and yet there's money for it. There's money for endless cruelty. Where is the money for your education? Where is the money to fix your fucking roads? Where is the money to improve your infrastructure? There is no money for that. Okay? You can't have free college. Best we can do is deport 20 million migrants. What a ridiculous situation this is.
All worried about how serious Trump might be in his threats that he wants to expand U.S. territory.
This morning, President-elect Trump renewing threats that the U.S. should expand its territories overseas. In a flurry of social media posts on Christmas Day, Trump suggesting that the U.S. could take control of Canada, parts of Panama, and Greenland, leading to swift pushback from key allies. The president of Panama, Jose Raul Molino, calling President-elect Donald Trump's claims that Chinese soldiers are running the Panama Canal nonsense. Trump Wednesday writing on social media, "Merry Christmas to all, including to the wonderful soldiers of China who are lovingly but illegally operating the Panama Canal."
No existe un solo soldado chino en el canal.
There is not a single Chinese soldier in the canal, Molino saying, adding that he does want to keep a good relationship with China as well as the U.S. and that it would be more appropriate to have direct conversations with Trump once he takes office on January 20th. Molino reminding Trump every inch of the canal is Panama's sovereign territory. In the last few days, the president-elect has been railing against the canal, suggesting that the U.S. seized control, arguing that Panama is ripping off American businesses, nominating Miami-Dade Florida County Commissioner Kevin Marino Cabrera, a longtime ally, for ambassador to Panama.
The fees being charged by Panama are ridiculous, highly unfair. This complete ripoff of our country will immediately stop.
Trump also suggesting again that Canada become the 51st state and that the U.S. should annex the Danish territory of Greenland. Greenland's prime minister writing in a statement, "Greenland is ours. We are not for sale and will never be for sale."
Of course, it's not likely the U.S. takes over new territory, but in a case like Panama, sources here in Washington tell us that there is a concern of expanding Chinese influence abroad, and the president-elect might be looking for ways to counter that or to keep it in check.